I would love to welcome everybody tonight. We have David Brymer with us. He's doing a presentation about the Ukraine and being a combat medic during the war from the start, and just offering insights of being on the battlefield. Rabbi Betsy will hopefully be able to join us. She has another engagement and may or may not make it. We also just, know that everyone is maybe a little overwhelmed and distracted by and focused on the events in Israel, which I think, David also understands and has experienced. So he will be talking with a PowerPoint and slides from his experience, and they'll be shared as he speaks. And then you can either please write your questions in the chat room, and we will, as close to the end as we can when David is done with the presentation, let him know what the questions are, or he will speak on the things of Jewish aid, the questions of Nazis and anti-Semitism, what it's been like there, and what our Jewish community can do to help preserve life. And I would say, David, take it away. And if people could mute themselves during his presentation, that would be much appreciated. Thank you, David.
Well, I just wanted to tell everybody sincerely that I am very grateful for your time. I'm very humbled that you guys would even want to hear what I have to say, and thank you. And also for everybody that has, family and friends and our beloved Israel, my thoughts are with you. I myself am still in Malawiim and have actually been in touch with my command on being recalled back for reserve action. As of at this point in time, I'm not going to be. We've been able to work it out. Actually, there's so many reservists getting called up that they can't even process everybody at this point. But I am on standby, and my heart and actions are willing to go if that's where I'm needed, and I will respond. So that has also been, very heavy on my mind, and I completely understand. So I think that we can absolutely say, and we're in solidarity when it comes to that topic. Everything that's going on in the world right now is horrific, and to very much say the least. But for good men to sit around and to do nothing is all evil needs to prevail, or a version of that saying. But the concept holds true, right? And Rebbe Nachman of Breslov is who I've usually gravitated towards for my spiritual leadership throughout my life. And whenever I was a young medic, first serving in the American Army and then serving in the Israeli Army, and now serving in my third army here in Ukraine. When I was a young medic, on the nameplate on my table, they said to write an inspirational quote. And that was to save a life is to save the world. And I've carried that with me my whole life. It's been my dedication, my waking dedication is to save a life is to save a world. And as you see on the display here on the slideshow, there is no despair in the world. And to have a quote like that, and to look around and to see the environment that I've been living in since March of 2022, and seeing the environment that's happening in different locations around the world, it seems kind of like an oxymoron. But I have to say that since I've been here and through some of the most horrific things that I've seen, lots of death, very traumatic wounds, and things like this. I've also seen the best in humanity. I've seen the best in all of us really, really come to the surface. And I've been in horrific situations. I'm not going to get too graphic, obviously, because the age range of the viewers, and with some discretion. But I've been in situations, where we're mopping up the blood after the end of a round of surgery, and still able to see the spark of humanity and love and the passion for each other, and that it's not going to be destroyed. So I think in that there's a lot of hope to be set, that no different than our ancestors, you know, singing forth and bringing forth and lighting Shabbos candles in the concentration camps and just trying to perform any mitzvah that we can muster together. It's something beautiful, and our mitzvahs will shine brighter than any of this negative cloud that's cascading over the world right now. And that's very important for us to remember first and foremost. Um, all right, so if you could please go to the next slide, and I'll go ahead and start. So, as I said, I started off in the American Army. I actually entered into an officer training corps whenever I was 12, went into the American Army at 17. Those are photos of me as a young medic learning how to do my job. And believe it or not, the med bag that I'm carrying in this photos are still the same med bag that I'm carrying today. So hundreds and hundreds of patients have been treated through that med bag um, on a 12-year journey. So next slide, please. This me on the left is, of course, when I was in McVeigh alone, starting over again for my second military. Whenever I made Aliyah, and was so proud to be able to serve the Jewish nation, just in any way that I possibly could. And the one on the right was taken of me in a training class here in Ukraine, which is kind of ironic because in it I'm carrying a weapon. And to date, as long as I've been on the front, I've never carried a weapon. So I carry a med bag. The weapon was for training purposes. I'm here to preserve life. I'm not here to take life. I wish no ill will on Russians or Muslims or any faction in the world. That's not who I am. That's not my place. These hands are made for healing. That's what they're for. And uh, through love and compassion, and through the focusing on bringing forth mitzvahs into the world, that's what I do. Unfortunately, firearms and things of this nature, they're tools. They're tools that I've been trained proficiently on how to use, but they're not tools of my trade. My trade is one of healing, as I said. So, next slide, please. So this gives you a rough idea of what the front lines are today and how much of the country is been completely occupied. Now, these lines have changed. The red would indicate where the Russians are holding. And I've not had the privilege to live in the political realm of knowing what is on the news in the States and what's not on the news in the States. Because I've had boots on the ground here literally since March 1st. And I'm going to take a moment to kind of tell you how I got here and how it all seemed to unfold. So, in my sevet, when I was at Mikveh alone there in Israel, my squad consisted of uh, 4 Russians, 3 Ukrainians, and myself. And that was my very first introduction to Ukrainian and Russian culture. And believe me, you, being a boy from the South, it was quite a cultural shock, to say the least. But we were all Jews, and we made the best of it. I had actually just purchased my very first home and was trying to close on it in February when the war broke out. And I signed the paperwork for my house uh, Friday morning. And as Shabbat came in, I felt like I had to do something. And I woke up Shabbat morning, and it was like someone kicked me. I had to go. I had to help. I'd been watching the potential invasion unfold for weeks, and my family, everybody told me that I was absolutely crazy. So Shabbat morning, I got up and was like, okay, Hashem, I'm listening. We're going to do something. I don't know what we're going to do, but we're going to do it. And I went around the house, started gathering my med bags, just medical supplies that I could, getting together what items I still had left. I was too fat to fit in my uniforms, so like trying to even get them to button was a little bit of a joke. And I didn't have enough money for a plane ticket. So I started to call around, and a friend of mine said, "I'll buy your plane ticket." And he bought my plane ticket, and I left Sunday morning. And on my way flying to Ukraine is when Zelensky opened the borders for foreigners. So when I left, the border hadn't even been opened yet for the foreigners to come in. And on the plane ride there, I happened to sit next to a gentleman wearing camouflage that I did not recognize. And through Google Translate, for 9.5 hours, we had a conversation. And he was a Ukrainian man. And he said that he could help me get across the border. So I said, okay. And we landed, and I got into this car with this stranger, and we drove to the border. And along the way, we ran into other Americans, we ran into other volunteers, and by the time we got to the Ukraine border, there was approximately 7 of us. And we just said, okay. And I wasn't sure how I could be helped, how I could help. A little bit about my background, having been a combat medic in both militaries prior. I also went to university for nursing, and prolonged casualty care is my specialty. So I was unsure of how I could be able to help. By the time that we got into Ukraine, we settled in a city called Lviv by March 1st. I'd never heard of Lviv. Matter of fact, outside of Kiev, I'd never heard of almost any city in Ukraine. And Kiev and Uman, that was it. And I started working. They said, we need help training medics and doing first aid classes. And I started teaching first aid classes to civilians for about 18 hours a day. And that was going to set the pace for my first 100 days of the war. I participated in the defense of Kiev. I was on medical response teams that was at Bucha when they uncovered the mass graves. I was at Irpin. I was with the army as they completely pushed back out of Kiev back into Russia, and they retreated back into Belarus. I made Mykolaiv, multiple excursions to the front around Mykolaiv between there and Kherson. Bakhmut, I spent a month and a half in Bakhmut. I was in Saladar. Um, some of the most bloodiest fighting in the last, definitely in the last century. We are at approximately 500,000 killed in action. I don't know if you're going to hear that on the news or not, but Ukraine has had more soldiers die in this war than the United States of America lost during the whole Second World War on both fronts. In the Vietnam conflict, we had 56,000 killed in action. We lost more than that many men in Saladar between the months of January and February of this last year. To put that into perspective for you, in a 2-month window, more soldiers were killed than the whole Vietnam conflict for the American losses. That's something that is not really discussed openly about our casualties and what it's like here. It is World War I style fighting more than it is anything NATO. It's heavy artillery. It's trenches. It's trench warfare. We dig a trench, they dig a trench. We charge their position, they charge our positions. And the whole front line is zeroed in on artillery. So anytime that you go to do a medical evacuation, you are under constant artillery fire. And we have this new modern invention called a drone. And these drones that are so inexpensive to make are so deadly. They have all the modern technology that you can imagine. So, infrared, you can't, all the camouflage in the world is not going to hide you from a drone that can pick up your body heat and your temperature. So, there's really no secrets on where any of us are at. Everything that we do is always on surveillance. We can see everywhere that they move a man, and they can see everywhere that we move men. And this is why it's so bloody. And I can't there's no words that I have for you to stress this. So my thing was, how can I make the difference? Well, in the first 2 weeks of the war, um, our field hospitals were hit. So Russians, part of their doctrine is they hit hospitals, and then they put a bounty on the head of medical personnel. So in the first couple weeks of the war, all military hospitals had been completely annihilated and destroyed, and we weren't even able to treat wounded. So when you have a unit of 1,000 men and they suffer between 75 and 80% casualties, that's 8 out of every 10 being killed without possibility of evacuation or being able to treat the wounded. So me being a single medic, what could I do? It was impossible without having a proper structure set in place. In the American army, in the Israeli army, okay, if you're wounded, you're a stone's throw away from a hospital. In Israel, if you're wounded, your evacuation time is always going to be less than an hour, and you're always going to have state-of-the-art medical facilities. And we're Jews, so every third of us is a doctor to begin with. But here in Ukraine, it's simply not the case. In a country where you can buy your medical degree for 5,000 euros, and most of your medical degrees are Soviets, um, it was a constant battle to go against out of date medicine, out of date technology and means. Um, so I started a school. This is how I could best help, replicating my knowledge. How many of me can I make? What can I do for the Ukrainians to help the Ukrainians? So after I spent enough time in combat and going back and forth to the front, I developed a course curriculum that operates outside of NATO standards of TCCC, so Tactical Casualty Combat Care. That's the standard that NATO operates in, and it's also the same standard that Israel operates in. Well, our circumstances here are dramatically different. So I had to develop a different combat medic method that intertwined my life's experience and the experience of some brilliant soldiers around me. And we developed CMC courses, and then I decided to train trainers to then teach these courses to their men. And year to date, I have over 70 instructors trained and over 15,000 medics trained. I have one medic that I was able to mentor and train. She's treated over 1,000 patients herself. I have 267 patients in direct combat since the war began, and I've overseen over 1,000 patients in collection points. Next slide, please. So, as you see, everybody's all in gear, and we're just doing a normal training facility. But I want to point out that nobody's in the same equipment. Some of those men are wearing homemade body armor. Some of those men have they went into the garage and cut chunks of metal to put plates in it because we just simply had nothing, and we made an army out of nothing. And the hoodie that I'm wearing in that photo is the same hoodie that I'm wearing now. It's actually an Israeli-made bulletproof hoodie. So this is actually my bulletproof vest. Next slide, please. So in this video, we're talking about how the gas lines, the natural gas lines, run on top of the street. And this van, if you notice, it's painted green, but it was originally red, but it was an ambulance. And as you see me there in my hoodie, but I've got body armor plates in that hoodie. That's why it looks the way that it does. And you see not carrying a weapon, carrying my med bag. And that makeshift ambulance is what we were using to get wounded. Now, this video was taken just a little bit south of Bakhmut, but it's a short audio. If you could go ahead and play it, please.
These are gas pipes? It should be.
So that artillery shell that had just came in was really consistent and was actually relatively close. So they hit us with anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 artillery shells a day across the front line. To put it into perspective for you, Russia produces 3 times the amount of artillery shells that the United States does. And they are actually shooting artillery at us at an approximate rate of 10 to 1. So they send 10 artillery shells to every 1 artillery shell that we send to them. Next slide, please.
It should be.
Sorry, not sure why that's, there we go.
So one of the things that I'm able to do, and one of the most effective things that we're able to do, is hemorrhage control. So most deaths on the battlefield that could be prevented are from lack of hemorrhage control, which means that the patient bleeds out before we're able to get them proper medical care. And tourniquets are a simple way that soldiers are able to really prevent the loss of life. It's highly effective, statistically makes a dramatic difference. And it takes me approximately about 6 hours and high repetition to teach a group about tourniquets. Now, and in this photo, the one on the left there, the gentleman that's standing with me, actually works for Rutgers University, and he is one of my sponsors, and he fundraises money to buy tourniquets. So all medical supplies that I have here in this country are 100% donated, or I buy them out of pocket myself. I'm not paid for what I do. I've yet to be paid for what I do. Everything that I've done here, the first 100 days of the war, I drained my 401k. I took out my life savings to buy my men something called IFAKs, individual first aid kits, med bags. So my medical bag that I operate out of, a 48-hour med bag, runs about $4,000. Cheap ones about $2,500 worth of medical supplies. Unfortunately, because of the war and what's going on, tourniquets that were $4.99 before the war started are going anywhere from $30 to $50 a piece, if you can even buy them, because they're backlogged on producing them from the amount of tourniquets that have had to been purchased due to this conflict. Now, we have companies set up here in Ukraine that are now producing our tourniquets, but this has been a long road with trial and error and development. And because Hashem has allowed me to be such an influential person and in the correct positions since the beginning of the war, doing everything medical in the country. I'm on a first name basis with most heads of the hospitals, with most organizations that will operate. And we're able to get really good deals on tourniquets. And now I've been able to find people to sponsor whole battalions, whole units, and been able to do this. But in the first 100 days of the war, we were just making homemade tourniquets out of everything that we could possibly make. And to see the progression of it, and to see how we've been able to institute a combat medicine program for the country, in the last year and a half has been a real testimony, because the country had no combat medicine program recognized in their medical structure for the country at all. None, zero. So they're learning lessons that America and NATO countries have been perfecting and learning for, the better part of the last century. Next slide, please. So in this video, some of these videos that are on here with me treating any type of wounded, just to let you know, I'm treating a wounded in the video. You don't want to watch it, I don't blame you, but these are the least graphic ones. And this gentleman has actually been hit with an artillery shell. And so there's two types of shrapnel, primary and secondary shrapnel. Primary shrapnel comes from the explosive itself and will burn at such a high temperature that when it makes entry into the flesh, it cauterizes the wound, which means that it burns it and it'll seal it. Secondary shrapnel is from rocks, debris, trees, things of this nature. And this gentleman has shrapnel up his legs, and he also had a piece of shrapnel enter into his left cheek here and had completely went through. But asking him questions, he had been wounded, some hours before, and I was the first medic that he had seen. So he literally walked himself out of combat with those wounds to get to me. And I've even had patients walk as far as 4 kilometers just to get to me. So you can press play, please.
He's saying that there was no injection. I asked about some medicine, and he said there was no injection, and he was walked by himself from the position all the time. Strong man. Any medics? You mean contact with him? Yeah. Cheekies?
So he had no medics directly in contact with him, and he literally walked back from his position to be wounded. And he was actually in relatively, good spirits, and he made a full recovery. But I could not stress to you the amount of just blatant miracles that I have seen since I've been here. I mean, just in your face, cannot believe that this person lived. They had definitely had a purpose, miracles. And I've had so many of them. I'll be working on a patient and they'll say, "Oh, you're Jewish." They'll see my yarmulke. Of course, yes. And they'll say, "My grandparents were Jewish, but we weren't allowed to talk about it." Or, my family's Jewish, but I don't know not much about it. And it was really surprising to me, as long as I've been into the country, how often that actually happens. And so much teshuva has I've seen, witnessed. As Jews, we are in every country. We are all over the world. And every conflict is our conflict when it comes to doing the right thing and to being able to stand up against oppression. Now, I don't care about the politics of this war. I don't trust any politician. I don't trust my government. I don't trust this government. There ain't a government that I do trust. But I do trust Hashem, and I do trust the mitzvahs, and I do trust the purpose to be there for each other and to stand. So when I go into combat, I do it with a boldness, an absolute boldness, because Hashem's with me, and I've seen it. Next slide, please. So this video was taken in between Saladar and Bakhmut. Remember, I was talking about between January and February, we lost more men than in the Vietnam conflict. This was actually in that time frame. And the pictures will correlate with each other. So on the right-hand side, there is my combat to fill in bag that I received in the IDF. And on that is my shofar. And I carry my shofar with me into combat. And there's times that I will blow my shofar, and it actually stopped combat once outside of Mickelhive. I was trying. We don't have radios, so most of the units that I'm with, we have no way to communicate with each other. So we just say we're going to be at a certain point at a certain time, and that's where we're at. And I blew my shofar, and everybody was trying to figure out, like, what the hell's that noise? Like the Russians were trying to figure it out, the Ukrainians were trying to figure it out. And I literally witnessed a shofar stop a gun battle. So that in itself was very, very much an experience. But in this video, we are hiding from a drone, and the Russian line is approximately 1 kilometer in front of us. And for you Americans, it's 1,000 meters. And they were holding it, and they were hitting us with phosphorus. And in this video, you can't see it because it's in a different clip that I was advised not to share publicly. When we get out into the field, if you were to look straight up, phosphorus would be falling over our heads. So if you could go ahead and play the video, please.
Видит только одного человека, не может сказать. Повязка есть зеленая? Что? Повязка зеленая там есть? Витя, бери носилки. Давай, тягни носилки. Ну все, дай носилки.
Ранение, ебать, ну пиздец. Які пече, їбать.
Що таке?
Ти ранений?
Нет,
He's not wounded.
перемерз, я вже сутки на виїзді, їбать.
Frozen. Freeze. Yeah.
Back.
Віть, блядь!
Він ще пив, тепер буде скуплений, давай.
О, бля, окей. Супер. Можна, треба його переложити на ці ноші. На цих легше нести.
Де рана?
Оця рука чи
Да,
ця?
да, во рука.
Вона перемотана?
Ні, там кров не йде, там вже перевірили його там.
Що там було?
Точно?
Да.
Це що?
І казав, що не кричу.
So in that video, all those men that were gathered around that one man on the stretcher, they all themselves were actually wounded. Every one of them had either been shot or had shrapnel wounds. And they carried out, all the wounded carried out to the most severe wounded. Now, unfortunately, I was not able to save that patient. He would go on to pass away. As a medic, and as I teach young medics, we see the worst of the worst, especially in combat. we will deal with more trauma than most emergency rooms could ever fathom. And these young medics have to find a way to cope with that, to deal with that. And I tell them that one of the greatest privileges that we have is that when our patients pass from this world, we're with them, and they're not alone. And I've had the privilege to sit with over 60 and 60 that have passed, but they didn't pass alone. We made sure we were there. Next video, please. I mean, next slide, please. So on the left-hand side, this is a fighting position. Like I said, it's trench warfare. And sometimes when you're under artillery fire, you get in that hole and you start digging. On the right-hand side is a PG photo that can summarize a little bit about my day that day. And that is a knee pad. And that is a gunshot wound that went through the knee pad. The boy was 19 years old. Next slide. So that is me there on the left in a training. You can always tell when I'm in training. It's when I'm carrying a rifle, and that's actually a BB gun. So, and on the right-hand side there, that is my parrot. It's his war name because he repeats everything that I say. He's actually asleep next to me right now. Everywhere I go, he goes. He's my little guardian. And those supplies that he's carrying on his back, that's my med bag. So I can treat approximately 7 patients out of that med bag, and it weighs a lot. We carry more weight than most anybody else in the military does. But he's been with me everywhere, and he was the one that was actually recording the last video that you've seen. Next slide. So this was at the beginning of the war, and I want to point out the dates on these bandages, right? So if you can see that, one's 1960, and the oldest one that I'd found that day was 1939. And we used them because we had nothing else to use. We were literally using World War II and then post to Soviet Union surplus, and was happy to get it. But I'll never forget being in this little school, and the whole village brought us what medical supplies that they had in boxes. If someone had just a few pills or bandages or this stuff left over from the last century, they bring it to us for us to use. And I look in the corner and there's a big Magen David box, and which was cool. So I didn't feel quite so like the only Jew on the front lines that day whenever I seen that. But I treated wounded with these bandages. Next slide, please. So this is I was on the left-hand side here. I was in the tree line behind it about 30 hours before this photo was taken by me. And that is a Ukrainian armored personnel carrier and a Russian armored personnel carrier. And I was pinned down in a trench with that cannon shooting over us, and it was so close that the heat from that cannon had actually burnt my arm a little bit. And the Ukrainian APC driver rammed the Russian APC driver, and everybody was killed. There was no survivors. And the other photos, the bottom right-hand side, that's what a tank looks like. So when people think about the tanks being this big, strong equipment, they get crushed like cans. And it's horrific. Next slide, please. This is just normal stores. This was for the first defense of Kiev, and there were people in that building lying dead that were just shopping. Next, please. That was just an apartment building. Next, please. Next. It's just a village. This is what every village in Russian occupied Ukraine looks like. You should think about that. Every village with over 1 million people still missing. Missing. Unaccounted for. I was in villages that the men and women were just executed where they were at. Old men on bicycles, women in their gardens. Sexual assaults. The youngest sexual assault victim that I treated was 7, and the oldest was in her 80s. Next. Next. So these were hand flown to me because I couldn't get medical supplies. And so I have had a chain of veterans and volunteers that were flying from America to the border, hand delivering me suitcases of medical supplies and then flying back. And for the longest time, it's the only way that we were able to treat any wounded. Next, please. This is a van that I went into combat with to evacuate wounded, and as you see, it has some combat damage there. Next slide. And that is a bullet hole in the windshield. Next slide. On the right-hand side, see the rearview mirror? I mean, there is a bullet hole in that also, where we were being shot doing an evacuation. Next slide, please. How am I doing on time? I can't quite see. Oh, I'm speaking for, I told you I was going to be long-winded.
You're fine.
So
We're 45 minutes in and you're
okay, all right. So these are different soldiers that I've met and sponsored. They're some of my medics. The gentleman on the right, when I found him, he was so scared. He was under artillery. He mentally couldn't handle it. And I spoke with him and I was able to give him training, and a year plus later, we're still in contact. He's a sergeant now. He's head over a medevac. But with me talking about the time, one of the things that I've not touched on that I'm going to go ahead and really just kind of skip to is the anti-Semitism part, because my synagogue asked me the first time that I came over here directly, quite frankly, why are you helping those Nazis? And I was really, really taken aback by it. I myself, family and from the Holocaust, as most of almost every other Jew that I know, in some way, shape, or form. And as far as Nazis goes, I've met more Nazis in America than I ever have here, to be quite honest about this. There are runs and there's a culture here that far dates the Third Reich and their use of the swastika or their use of these ruins. And one of the big questions that I get is the SS Stryker ruins. Well, there's American Army tank units that still use the SS Stryker ruins. There's units all over the world that use these symbolisms because the symbolisms weren't just used by the Nazis. Am I saying that there's no Nazis in Ukraine? No, that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that I do not experience anti-Semitism. I've had men in my class with eagle and swastika chest tattoos that have told me that they would follow this Jew to hell. So That's what we're called to be, right? We're better than that. We're better than anti-Semitism. We're better than to say that we can't help or to be there for anybody because of something that happened decades ago. I mean, we we persevere and prevail from this ideology. And as a medic, as a medical professional, I don't care who you are, I'm going to treat you. That ain't my job to be that judge. And whether it's a Russian or a Nazi or a regular civilian or a Russian Nazi civilian or anything else, you're wounded, I'm going to provide medical aid and I'm going to provide that care to a certain standard that's needed. And whatever life decisions that you've made in your life and however that unfolds in judgment, that has nothing to do with me and our purpose. Jews are so predominant here in Ukraine. There's more synagogues. I've seen more synagogues than churches. And for anybody that questions that, just go to Dnipro. I mean, you can't walk down the street without seeing 10 Jews. We have a strong case, and we actually make up a large faction of the Ukrainian nationalists, and we have whole entire Jewish regiments here in Ukraine. So, and the majority of the people that I served with in the IDF were Ukrainian. And so much of our Jewish lineage, from the Baal Shem Tov to Rebbe Nachman, uh, even Rebbe Shmierson was born in Mykolaiv. So many of our great Tzaddiks throughout history were born and came from this land. And I'm not going to let the disgusting, vile acts of a handful of people a century ago make my judgments on who gets help today. And I'm only saying it in that manner because I've had whole synagogues get mad at me for quote unquote helping these Nazis. And I hope that that's made it very clear. So, you want to do questions now, or you want me to keep going? I know we're not through the slide, or how do you want to do this with the time frame?
So right now, I do not see any questions in the chat room. I'm guessing because everyone is pretty fascinated and listening to you. So if anybody has a question, I would say please write it in the chat room. Otherwise, David, we would welcome you to continue.
Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so the one on the left is actually under the same bridge that I was at whenever we walked out into the field with that patient. So that picture kind of got jumbled up. But here on the right hand side, I'm on my knees in the back of this van, treating this wounded who was shot in his back twice into his stomach. But it took 2 hours to get him to me. And it just, sorry, I had a message pop up on my screen. It was crazy. So please play the video. We actually hit a bump so hard that my head bounced off the ceiling and gave me a concussion that day. While the video is playing, it doesn't have audio. Is my audio still clear? Can you hear me? Okay. I had a couple questions pop up. I'm trying to read it, but on my phone and navigating this, I don't want to accidentally hang up. Is that where?
Yeah. So David, a question has come up that is the U.S. Embassy aware of your presence? And if so, what interactions have you had and do they support your efforts?
Well, the U.S. government knows if I have $600 on my bank account or more, so I'm pretty sure they're aware of my movements. Every time I fly in and out of America, I am pulled to the side. My photo was taken, my fingerprints are taken. I'm questioned to make sure that I'm not a neo-Nazi. And I've had individual dealings with different Homeland Security agents and even a couple FBI agents that have shown me their personal support. But as anything officially, no. I have no official dealings with the U.S. government at all, or the Israeli government for that matter, because I am a dual citizen. And I had another question pop up.
No, oh, how do you keep your faith in God in the face of the horrors of war?
Amuna. Amuna is absolute. And that goes back to what I was saying in the very beginning. To save a life is to save the world. And I firmly believe that Hashem protects those who protects and provide for others. And that's my role here, is to help bring life into this. And we are Hashem's spokespeople on this earth, and with the privilege and burden of carrying the Torah and to carrying these mitzvahs with us when we go, we are to show those around us. And that's exactly what I do, what my men see me do when I wrap my tefillin in the mornings, when I carry my shofar into combat, whenever they do everything they can to make sure that they're not feeding me pork, even though eating kosher here is completely not doable. It ain't never a question of me about faith without Amuna. I don't wonder if Hashem is real. I know that I know that I know that I know that I know. The question is, what am I doing about it? Right? So it ain't every breath that I take, it's given to me. And only Hashem will decide when that's going to be taken away from me. Not the Russians, not artillery, not the war, not nothing else. And that's absolute. So the question isn't for me, how do I keep my faith? The question for me is, how do I manifest my faith in a way that I'm supposed to as a Jew?
David, I want to be sure we have, 5 or 6 more minutes. I want to be sure that you maybe let us know as a Jewish community what we might be able to do to help.
Um, I always need always need support. Like I said, I don't have a salary. I don't have an income. My personal life, my personal bills, my personal everything was completely put on hold. I'm literally most days I'm day to day. Last week I had $20 to my name, and this week I'll have a little bit more as donations come in, but I need donations. And also public being able to maybe speak in public when I come back to the States. I do come back to the States every so many months. I would love to be able to meet everybody in person, or maybe be able to do something in person. If you guys would allow that. Like I said, I'm a much more in-person guy. I'm an untech savvy millennial.
We'd love to have you come visit us.
Thank you.
And hi, I'm the rabbi. I'm Sippy's
Oh.
friend. Sippy's my friend.
No. Yeah, Alyssa is a lifesaver to me. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have a car doing what I do, and she single-handedly almost keeps me alive. So I don't know how she does it, but um, she's my number one supporter, my biggest fan. I had some questions pop up on the screen.
Deb, you're muted.
Can someone read the questions to me?
Yeah. Are the level of supplies you have adequate now? Do you ever give presentations to ER groups in the States?
So the level of supplies that I have, so there's a whole lot more coming into the country now that wasn't before. And we've been able to get a lot of the kinks of the supply chains out. So it ain't as critical patient to patient like it was. So now that's starting to get stabilized. However, I always have a shortage on Israeli bandages. I always have a shortage on immediate IFAC and trauma supplies for the zero line. We don't Now it ain't even a question of the country having a shortage of medical supplies. It's that we don't have medics, we don't have doctors, we don't have nurses. We have whole hospitals with hundreds of patients with one doctor and a couple nurses. So we really need medical personnel as opposed to real medical supplies. But all the stuff that I do, all the stuff that I do here, our medical supplies are not paid for by the unit. So it's all stuff that's donated, given to us directly or through different organizations.
David, can you tell us what kind of Jewish education you had and your family's Jewish activities?
Yeah. So I'm the first Jew in 3 generations to practice. My parents were about as Jewish as a ham sandwich. The I picked up on my Judaism on my own. I knew that my grandparents were in the Holocaust. I was really fascinated about that history, and my grandfather took me to meet the rabbi whenever I was 12, and I started studying with him and picked up on it, and it became a lifelong passion. And then when I joined the American Army, I started going to synagogue and shul on a regular basis, and I was 20 before I learned to wrap tefillin, and then I ended up going through a official Orthodox conversion, and then made Aliyah to Israel, and then of course I went to Machon Meir Yeshiva in Israel, and predominantly just lots of independent studies, just lectures every single day. So I go to sleep and wake up with a lecture, and then my independent individual studies. Unfortunately, um, I'm 29 years old, and the military has taken up majority of my whole entire life. So my Jewish education is something that will continue until I'm done here.
So David, I found it pretty compelling, one that you basically are there without a weapon. It's interesting to know that you have a parrot taking care of you. So that's reassuring, I think, to all of us. And I also think it's pretty compelling that you, as you told us actually before we started, that you're in the bedroom with the rest of your medic colleagues and they're all asleep face down. I think we even heard a little bit of their snoring.
Yeah.
So do you use the spaces well that you have available to you?
Yeah, it's always changing. And today we have a room, so that's awesome, and we have beds, so that's even better. Most of the time it's in the back of an ambulance or on the ground, or I carry a tactical hammock that I sleep in an awful lot, unfortunately.
So I don't know if anybody else has any other questions or wants to say anything. We so appreciate your time and probably taking away from your sleep. and what you're doing, and knowing that it's also difficult for you, knowing what's going on in Israel, and you again being one of the reservists that could be called up. But this was fascinating. We've recorded it so that anybody who wants to watch and view it again, or whoever's missed it, and people have asked if we could record it, they'll have the opportunity to see it and listen to you.
And when you put up the slide for how to contact you, did it have how to make donations on it? I didn't see that.
To Rabbi Alyssa.
Okay.
Yeah,
We'll get in
because
touch.
so we've had issues. I've had issues with like PayPal and different ways, and then legally what things get accepted here, and then it turns into a big issue. But Rabbi Alyssa really helps me and takes care of any of that. So if anybody feels compelled, anything can just be sent directly to her, and I would be very, very grateful. Everything, every dime goes to what I'm doing here, right? So I sold off almost everything I had. My house is empty back in the States. I've taken out personal loans. I've maxed out my credit cards. I've drained my bank account. I've spent over 50,000 of my own money since I've been here. And I've literally been donation to donation for about 7 months. And I had to have a break over the summer, and I came home for 3 weeks, and that's literally only because Rabbi Alyssa paid for it out of her own pocket. I don't know if she wants me to say that, but all props go to her. I'm just very grateful. So
And she is so trustworthy and so good.
yes, yes, absolutely. I've never respected a rabbi so much in my life. Like I love her to death. And that's sincere. Is there any more questions? Anything else that I can do? I'm here for you, and I know that your guys' time is valuable. But whatever I can answer while you've got me, I'm here. Or any other time, or if anybody has individual questions or wants my contact information, they're always more than welcome to have it. Like every class that I've ever taught in Ukraine, I've given out my phone number. So my medics call me all night long. Actually, even while we've been on the phone, I've had a couple messages. It don't stop. Sometimes I treat gunshot wounds through video chat. Done that a couple times, walking people through that are panicking. So sorry, that was a rabbit hole. Don't know where I was going with that.
Thank you
It's all
so
good,
much.
and you're an inspiration to all of us, as one of our viewers just said.
Well, thank you. I'm humbled. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Deb for making all of the arrangements and contacts and facilitating tonight.
And thank you to
Well,
Alyssa for the tech. And seriously, David, just be well and be safe.
All right, absolutely. Bye.